What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the show. As always, thank you for tuning in. Today, I wanted to touch down on a video I seen of a electric vehicle that was involved in a high-speed chase, crashed, and turned into a HAZMAT debacle, where there was electric batteries thrown all over the highway, and the carcass of the car was actually sitting in a pond because the first responders and firefighters were afraid of the batteries reigniting. This is actually a unintended or unrealized consequence of electric vehicles, and so that's what we're going to talk about today, the unintended consequences of this push for green energy, electric vehicles, solar panels, and windmills that is being pushed down society's throats. And I really don't think they thought this one through all the way, like many other unintended consequences, like many other movements that are being forced down Americans' throats and people's throats in general. I was just watching this video, and I'm just like, man, we got to talk about this, because I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of this as we start to see more and more electric vehicles on the road. And so it's not just the crashes and the hazardous waste we have to worry about, but also the weight of these vehicles and the possible damage that it could cause to other infrastructures in our country, our roads, bridges, parking garages. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. A lot of interesting stuff to get into. If you want to support the show, please download the podcast on all major podcast platforms. Just go to the top into the search bar, type in my name, Steven Torriello, and you should find the show, download it, and then most of all, share the show with your friends and family. If you want to follow the show, you can also follow the show on Rumble, our last bastion for free speech. And if you want to get a hold of me directly, you can drop me a line at steventorrielloshow@gmail.com. As always, thank you guys for tuning in, and let's do this.
You're listening to The Steven Torriello Show, building a platform of liberty for people in search of truth with a dash of hope and a life worth living. The Steven Torriello Show. And now, here's Steven.
So, on the show, we talk a lot about the unrealized consequences of this new push for electric vehicles, solar panels, windmills. Here on this show, we believe in a clean environment, of course. I mean, I don't know of anybody on the right, Republican or conservative, that wants to destroy the planet. I think, we all want clean water and clean air. It's just that the left pushes it way too far, and they always do with everything. I think we all have the common goal. It's just how we get there. This is how the right and the left feel about climate change, where the left, being how they are majority secular, they tend to worship climate change as if it's an existential threat, as if the ends justify the means. We have to do everything possible so that our planet doesn't spontaneously combust into a flame. This is what they're teaching kids, and one could wonder why the younger generations have higher stress levels and higher suicide rates. I think that's probably, it has to contribute a little bit to those statistics. I'm sure not all of it, but it certainly doesn't help when the younger generation going to school from elementary school all the way to high school, when you have teachers and professors and your intelligentsia telling you and trying to convince you that if we don't drive electric vehicles and get solar panels and windmills, that the earth is going to die, that the earth is going to burn up and everyone's going to perish. I'm sure that doesn't bode well for the psyche. Anyways, in this radical push for green energy, I think there's going to be a time when the unrealized consequences meets reality. And I think we may be starting to journey in that realm. I think we're starting to see those unrealized consequences right now. And so I got a video. I actually found this to be quite interesting. This is an audio piece from NBC News. A car crash involving an electric car, most likely a Tesla, leads to a HAZMAT cleanup in Petaluma County. I'm going to let you listen to this, and then we're going to get into some maybe other unrealized consequences of electric vehicles that I just don't see a lot of people talking about, and I really, really don't think we're going to have the infrastructure. We're not going to have the resources to fix some of these unrealized consequences of this radical push for electric vehicles. So I'm going to go ahead and play this audio piece, and then we're going to talk about some other consequences I see looming in the future. Here, check this out.
New danger for first responders as electric cars grow in popularity. Crews are seeing more electric vehicle fires. They burn hot, and they can sometimes reignite. That's why this car is staying in this pond overnight. NBC Bay Area's Tom Jensen explains how it ended up there in the first place.
A pile of burned batteries is all that remains on dry land along northbound 101 in Petaluma, and the Lucid EV that they once powered is now covered by a tarp in a pond of standing rainwater at the Petaluma Boulevard exit.
The vehicle sped up to well over 100 miles per hour.
The CHP says the driver, a man in his mid-20s, sped up after a CHP cruiser pulled up behind him, looking to pull over the driver for speeding.
The officer turned on his lights and sirens and was going approximately 100 miles per hour when the vehicle was still pulling away from him.
He said the driver couldn't negotiate the curve at the northbound exit, hit a concrete barrier, and rolled, and the burning batteries scattered across the roadway as the car flipped into the water.
They were on fire when we showed up. Some of them exploded.
He worries first responders will encounter more and more of the super quick EVs and more of these crashes involving their batteries that burn extremely hot and are difficult to fully extinguish.
This is probably the first crash that I came out to where there was batteries in the road on fire, and so it's going to be an evolving training, I guess, and evolving as we go and learning more about these vehicles.
Recently, the Mountain View Fire Department purchased a new tool to help battle the battery fires more efficiently and safely. It allows firefighters to stand back while the system punctures a hole in the battery compartment and fills it with water until it's out.
We've gotten our crews safer, further back from that fire while it's happening.
More fire departments are expected to use the devices that cost about $34,000 to keep pace with the increased EV crash numbers. As far as this crash goes, HAZMAT teams decided to leave the car in the water until Sunday to make sure no battery fires reignite. Tom Jensen, NBC Bay Area News.
I see so many problems with this. I mean, if any of you have drove on 95, any of you living on Florida, or really any major highway, but I know 95 for a fact, they have accidents on that highway constantly. I mean, this thing is like driving in a NASCAR race when you're on 95. I mean, people are bumper to bumper doing 80 miles an hour, 85 miles an hour. It really is insane. It's a totally different realm of driving down here in Florida on 95. I mean, it gets pretty wild sometimes. But there is a ton of accidents on 95. And if these first responders, the firefighters, are they just going to leave the burnt carcasses of these cars on the highway for a day or two because of the lithium-ion batteries reigniting? I mean, do they realize what that's going to look like? I mean, it's going to look like, I don't know. I mean, think of the long list of problems this is going to cause if you can't remove this vehicle out of the road for days because of the lithium-ion batteries. This is one of those things I just don't think they thought about when pushing the EVs onto everybody. And so this is just one of the many, many problems I think we're going to be facing in the future. I see the EV market, I see this as like a small blip in the timeline of our country, of our society. It's going to be like one of those things history looks back on as just like cassette tapes were to audio and CDs. It's just going to be like a phase. And some people will keep them around because they prefer them over combustible engines. Because if you really think about it, they're really not that efficient. By the time you break it all down and you add these unrealized consequences, these unpredictable, unforeseen challenges in EVs, I think it's going to end up being more trouble than it's worth. So I actually started thinking about other problems that may arise from electric vehicles. And one of those things is the weight of these electric vehicles. These electric vehicles weigh almost twice as much as a combustible engine vehicle because of the batteries. And because of that weight, that causes a whole other realm of problems, like damage to highways. So when you think about the weight of these vehicles and the more and more of these EVs that, are coming out onto the highways, the more damage it's going to cause these roads. And so the weight of a vehicle affects the road surface in a non-linear manner, meaning that as the weight increases, the damage doesn't just increase proportionally, but can actually multiply. Even small increases in vehicle weight can lead to significantly more road damage. And so, therefore, as these EVs become more popular, there's going to be concerns about the accelerated degradation of road infrastructures. And so we all know that our cities do not. I mean, to me, I know it is certainly here. The roads are crap as it is. And it seems like they are constantly working on roads. That is one thing for sure, folks. If you're trying to get into a career that is secure, there is no doubt that road construction is probably going to be your best bet. It almost seems like these road workers are constantly working on roads. I mean, there's some highways here in Florida that they've been working on, no joke, for 20 years. They've been working on portions of 95 for 10 years now. I don't know what they're doing. I have no idea, but it seems like they're forever working on roads. And this is before the added weight of electric vehicles. And so you think about that, that means that's going to cause some serious problems in the future. Certainly once more and more of these cars get on the road. So now you have that considerable impact on the roads. And these cities are going to have to adapt to the maintenance that they do on these roads. So what is it going to do? It's going to cost the taxpayers more money. Why? Because most people's state taxes or property taxes actually go towards the roads and bridges. When you have to increase the maintenance on the roads, that means you're going to have to increase the spending. And when you increase the spending, that means, that's right, they're going to have to increase people's taxes. And so one way or the other, people are going to be paying for these electric vehicles. So regardless of whether you have one or not, you're going to be paying for the unrealized consequences of electric vehicles. And not just roads, but when are we going to start seeing actual tragedies happen from electric vehicles that frankly wouldn't happen otherwise? It would not happen with combustion engines. It wouldn't have happened if this radical push for green energy was being shoved down our throats. And so another one of those is parking garages. In the same case with the roads, the weight of these electric vehicles is going to start affecting some of these older parking garages. And in fact, it already is. So this is a report that was put out by thedrive.com. This actually came out in April of 2023. But certainly something that I didn't even think about until it actually happened. And so it says modern electric vehicles are heavy. It's partly due to the batteries needed to give them decent range and partly due to the bloat affecting all modern vehicles. Either way, it's got authorities in the UK worried that older parking garages could collapse under the strain. And so, as covered by the Telegraph, many multi-story parking garages across the UK were built in the 1960s and 1970s, when cars were far lighter than today. Since then, many have suffered from neglected maintenance, leaving them susceptible to structural issues. The concern from experts is that new, heavier EVs could push these tired structures beyond their limits. Yeah. I mean, I can totally see this happening in the not-so-distant future, where we're watching parking garages collapse on their own weight. And what are they going to do? They're going to have to go and retrofit all of these parking garages that were built back in the 60s or 70s. You know how much money that's going to cost? Again, with the taxpayers most likely flipping the bill. Unless they're private parking garages, most are, but there are some public parking garages, and so that's another expense that the taxpayer is going to have to be flipping due to the radical push on electric vehicles. And listen, I don't have anything against electric vehicles. I really don't. I think they're great for some people. I think they're a good alternative for people that work close to home, or, you know, there's certain circumstances where an electric vehicle makes sense. I mean, it's no different than, you know, the riding your bike to work if you work down the street. It's the same concept with electric vehicles. If that mode of transportation works for you, then it works for you. What I don't like is the constant push onto people that don't want them. And not just that, but it's causing other problems because of this push. Now, if the federal government wasn't pushing electric vehicles down people's throats and incentivizing people to buy them, even though they don't need them, in this notion that it's going to save the planet somehow, some way, no one's really figured it out yet how that's going to happen. I actually believe the opposite. I think this radical push for green energy, solar panels, windmills, and electric vehicles is going to do more damage to the environment. And we've did a whole show about this on the amount of minerals and resources that goes into making these electric vehicles. Most of these resources being mined by children over in places like the Congo and other third world nations. The amount of resources and minerals, precious minerals like gold, copper, and very, very rare metals like cobalt. Like there's all this stuff that goes into making these electric vehicles, all has to be mined, right? Most of these resources and minerals come from third world countries and, most of all, China. And I don't know the last time we checked, but China is an adversary of ours. And so, you know, when these people, and this is why they're buying up all these cobalt mines across the country and mostly in the Congo. And do I have to remind you, you ever seen that movie Blood Diamond? You've seen what they do to people there, to the citizens in Africa when there is money on the line. There is these massive slave encampments, children being enslaved, wars, death, famine. I mean, totally crazy stuff. And so could these electric vehicles actually be causing more harm than good? I think when you calculate all these unrealized consequences of these electric vehicles, yes, they are going to end up being more harmful than good, but only because of the push of the electric vehicles, only because of this radical agenda of forcing all this stuff onto people, when they could have just let the private market handle this. And I think it would have took longer for people to, it would have took longer for this technology to merge into our society. But I think you wouldn't have had such an impact on the environment. But now with this radical push and incentivizing private corporations to maybe cut corners in mining or cut corners when manufacturing these things. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of negative outcomes, the unintended consequences of this push for EVs. And so one of those things is no matter who you are, whether you have one or not, you're going to be paying for these things. You're going to be paying for the road maintenance when roads start to become more damaged faster because of the added weight of the electric vehicles. People are going to be paying for the retrofitting and refurbishing of parking garages because of the added weight of these electric vehicles. The human cost in these third world countries, when it comes to mining these precious minerals and resources for making and manufacturing these electric vehicles. The manufacturing itself, when it comes to manufacturing lithium, is a very, very dirty process. And most of all, a lot of this stuff is non-recyclable. So, like the windmills and solar panels, a lot of these things are not being recycled. In fact, a large majority is not being recycled. And so what happens? Well, you have, I think a perfect example, and I think we mentioned this before on a show in the past, is the landfills are filling up with solar panels. And there was a story that came out in the LA Times, I think a few years ago. The push for solar panels really started in California, when people started installing solar panels on their roofs, on residential areas. Well, that was about 20, 30 years ago. Well, guess what? Solar panels only last about 20 or 30 years. And so now all these homes are replacing their solar panels. And there's nowhere for these solar panels to go. And so they're ending up in the landfills. And lo and behold, the unintended consequences of solar panels is coming to fruition. Where in the article it said that the chemicals for processing the solar panels and the chemicals in the solar panels themselves are starting to leak into the water table in California. And so guess what? You just contaminated people's drinking water. Again, unintended consequences of the very, very bad ideas that I think is being pushed all over the world. To me, as of right now, the United States is now the #1 exporter of bad ideas. We are exporting our bad ideas all across the globe when it comes to transgenderism, when it comes to this radical green energy push for renewable resources, like the green energy, the Green New Deal, all this stuff, the climate, religion, it's all damaging. It's damaging to societies. It's damaging to people's lives. It's damaging, most of all, to the environment itself, the very thing that they were trying to prevent. So, I wanted to, before we move on, I wanted to get to this article where this parking garage collapses. This is actually pretty crazy. So, the collapse of a parking garage in New York City on Tuesday that killed at least one person has put a new spotlight on aging structures used for vehicle storage. The 5-level building, which has several active violations listed with the city, dates back to 1925 and was first licensed as a garage in 1957 for 5 or more vehicles per floor, WNBC reported. The exact cause of the structure's failure has not been determined, but updates have been made to it in the years since, and it is currently licensed to accommodate 276 vehicles. Images from the scene indicate that at least a dozen SUVs were parked on just the top floor. The incident occurred after a recently study raised concerns that many older parking garages may need to be reevaluated due to the increasing average weight of vehicles, particularly electric models. Yeah. And so, just like this article said, they're going to have to go reevaluate all these parking garages. And the only reason I'm talking about this right now was that video of this car crash with this electric vehicle. And they have this ragged, mangled mess of just electrical components and burnt plastic. This, what used to be a vehicle, was just sitting in a pond. I'm like, well, aren't they going to pull it out? No, they're actually not going to pull it out. They're going to leave it there for 2 days because of the batteries. They're afraid the batteries are going to reignite. And so you have like it turned into a HAZMAT crisis from a car crash. And I'll be honest, I don't know how that driver survived that wreck. I'm going to post this article in my podcast description. When you guys go to look at this, you're not going to believe how anybody survived this wreck. But it was just a mangled mess. And that's another thing. So the added weight to these electric vehicles, I mean, that means the inertia just by physics alone is going to cause more damage when in accidents, because obviously the car is heavier, there's more momentum, there's more weight, there's more force, more G-forces, more everything. It's going to add the higher impact whenever there's these types of accidents. So, I mean, I assure you, hitting somebody going 60 miles an hour in an electric vehicle is going to hit a lot harder than, say, a Toyota Corolla would. And so this is the type of stuff I just don't think people are looking at when we're discussing this push for electric vehicles. I actually have a friend of mine that just got a Tesla. And look, in his case, it worked out great. I mean, he lives right down the street from work. You know, he's calculated everything on how he was going to save money on gas, the maintenance on these vehicles. Supposedly, the batteries last 10 years. But heaven forbid, if you have to replace them, I think they're like $10,000 to $15,000. The electric vehicles are very, very expensive to work on. There's very limited technicians and maintenance people to work on these vehicles. And so there's just a whole plethora of problems when it comes to these vehicles. And I just don't think it's going to be worth it. And I think, like I said in the beginning, I think by the end, they're going to look at this push for electric vehicles as a net negative on our society. I don't think it's going to be anything like they're trying to convince us it's going to be. Are they going to be around? Of course. It's, you know, certain people are going to have them. What I'm really interested in is this hydrogen energy. In fact, I was so interested in it, I was actually doing, I read a lot into hydrogen engines, and we did a show about this a few weeks back. I think hydrogen energy is a game changer. There's, of course, a lot of hurdles to get over to get to a point to where, you know, they could be mass produced. But I mean, the technology is amazing. The byproduct is H2O. The everything is exactly the same. There is not that distance. What do they call that? The range anxiety. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah, people have range anxiety is a phrase that's being used for people that have electric vehicles. They're constantly worried about how far they can make it on their batteries. Because, I mean, the charging stations are not in abundance like gas stations. It takes 30 minutes to charge your car. I mean, nobody likes taking long trips in electric vehicles. I actually have another buddy whose dad bought an electric vehicle, and they drove up to New York or Jersey in it. It was one of the worst experiences they ever had. It took them like 4 times longer than it normally would because they constantly had to stop and charge their vehicle. And sometimes in not so pleasant areas. So this is just personal experience. This is what I've been hearing about these electric vehicles. Now, like I said, are they going to go anywhere? No, I think they're always going to be around. That's going to be some people's preferred mode of transportation. I think hydrogen's going to end up being a thing. I'm actually really interested in it. I'm highly invested in hydrogen energy. I think nuclear energy is starting to make a comeback. You're starting to see some countries and the United States kind of ease up on their jihad against nuclear energy because it was just dumb. Nuclear energy is by far one of the most efficient ways, what is one of the greatest discoveries in mankind's history, and one of the most efficient ways of producing electricity and energy. And so for now, nuclear energy seems to be the way to go. It's really expensive, it's highly regulated, a lot of red tape, and so it's expensive to build nuclear energy plants, but it does yield the highest return on energy. And in fact, I was reading another article in where scientists have discovered a radiation-consuming bacteria in Chernobyl. It's actually crazy. So scientists that are studying the Chernobyl power plant years and years later, just last year, discovered a bacteria that is actually consuming the radiation in the most radiated places in that power plant in Chernobyl. It's almost like a fungus, and where it turns radiation into melanin. And so the fungus actually turns a black color as it consumes this radiation and absorbs it. So I think in time you're going to see science start to discover ways of kind of getting rid of our spent plutonium and uranium for these power plants. And so like the uranium rods, the plutonium, the nuclear rods that, has the left and the climate religionist worried about contamination. Listen, I agree. I don't think it's a good idea to fill, mountain upon mountain of spent uranium rods. But what I do know is that human beings are excellent at adapting to situations in times of need, on the precipice. And so I think we're going to find a way to get rid of these spent uranium rods, whether that's through bacteria, whether that's through some type of scientific process. I mean, look, we already have bacteria now that's consuming plastics. I mean, it may be the way that we get all the plastics out of our oceans, because this bacteria actually consumes plastic and turns it into glucose, sugar, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. To me, that has always been my biggest rant on pollution. I'm not a big climate religionist. I'm not this person. I'm not into the climate hysteria. But the one thing that really does bother me is the plastics in our oceans. That's a real thing that is man-made, and it is affecting our water supply and it's affecting our whole oceans. They're starting to find microplastics in fish now, wild fish in the sea. There's this island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where all the currents meet. Is this island of plastic. No joke. It is a giant island. I don't know how big it is, but I think they said it's like half the size of Texas or something crazy like that. So think about that. An island of plastic, like 2 foot thick, half the size of Texas, is floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. From all these different countries just dumping their trash and plastics into the ocean. That, ladies and gentlemen, is concerning to me. What I can't seem to understand is how is it that the human race can put a man on the moon, but we can't figure out how to clean up our own oceans, and we can't figure out a suitable replacement for plastics. Glass is out of the question because it's just too expensive. It's not realistic to think that we can just replace plastic with glass. If the left, this is the problem with the left, is they just take things way too far. Now, if the left actually believed that glass could replace plastic, there would be this mass push of replacing all plastics with glass, and they're unrelentless in pushing this movement. But not me, not people on the right. We're realistic in what human beings are capable and incapable of doing. And so I'm just surprised there's not, like a glucose plastic. There are plastics, don't get me wrong. There's definitely been some breakthroughs in science when it comes to alternative plastics. But the problem is the degradation of the molecules. So essentially dissolving. These plastics, they can't really hold liquids. Now, if it's plastics like, a hard plastic like a pen or something like that. But one of the things you'll notice about the plastic island in the middle of the ocean is that a lot of it is just water bottles and water jugs, milk jugs. That's what a lot of the plastic is. And plastic doesn't break down that fast, but it is starting to break down, and like I said, it's finding its way into our food. Microplastics. And so these are, I didn't really plan on talking about microplastics in the ocean, but that's where the show went. But what got me behind the microphone to do the show was the unintended consequences of the left's ideas and how the cure ends up being worse than the disease. And I think we must take into consideration when trying to adopt the left's ideas is that they don't always think ahead. And in fact, they almost never think ahead on almost anything. This is why they're destroying our court system, our justice system, our intel agencies, because they never ask themselves, well, Well, what happens if Joe Biden wins the 2024 election? Is anybody going to accept that as a legit, free, and fair election? No, but they don't even stop long enough to ask themselves that question. And so this is why I say we have to stop listening to the left, man. We have to stop listening to the progressives. We have to stop following them. We have to stop taking them seriously because they're just not serious people. Because a sane, rational person would ask themselves, well, what is this going to look like 6 months before an election that we're using the justice system to target Joe Biden's political opponent? Like, is that going to look bad? The mere appearance of impropriety would sway a sane, rational person. But these people are not sane and rational, and so they don't care. The ends justify the means. Damn the torpedoes. Bring it all down. Just so long as it brings them their desired outcome. And so this is the same thing, really. It all is connected. It goes full circle, folks, with the electric vehicles. Now, look, if you have an electric vehicle, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not going to work for me. I'm still a combustion engine guy. In fact, I'm a huge horsepower junkie. Like, I love muscle cars. I love sports cars. In fact, I'm actually looking at getting a Nissan 370Z as like my midlife crisis car. It's my wife isn't as happy, let's just say excited as I am. But it's always been a car. It's been one of the cars I've wanted almost my whole life. It was actually a 350Z is what I wanted. Then they came out with the 370Z, and now they're going back to the 350Z again, which looks absolutely amazing. And I'm surprised we don't see more on the streets. They're cool looking. My dream car is a Nissan GTR for obvious reasons. It's just the Skyline has been a favorite car of mine since I was a little kid. Unfortunately, they don't make Skylines anymore, but they do make the Nissan GTR, which was supposed to be the spin-off of the Skyline. And man, are they sweet cars. But they're like $110,000. And so, again, sane, rational, and realistic versus unrealistic. And so I realize that I'm never probably going to own a $110,000 car. So I will settle for a Nissan 370Z, which is like a little sister, almost the same engine, pretty close. But I've always been a horsepower junkie. I think combustible engines are always going to be around. We've been using this technology since the internal combustion engine was invented. And I just think until we find a better means of transportation, I think combustible engines, yes, fossil fuels is the best thing that we have right now. I'm not saying that's the only thing that we need to be using. I'm perfectly fine with, if EVs work for some people and not others, okay. If solar panels and windmills work for others, okay. But I don't think we should be taking over our whole ocean and filling them with windmills, okay? Like, I think there's going to be some dire consequences of doing stuff like that. In fact, we're already starting to see it. I don't think, replacing huge swaths, hundreds of thousands of acres of land with solar panels is necessarily a good idea. I am kind of leaning on the side of nuclear energy being kind of the future for electricity for now, until we find something better. I think the thing is the left and these climate religionists have just put way too many of their acorns into the solar panel and windmill basket. And I'm sorry, but lithium-ion batteries is just not efficient enough. The technology is just not efficient enough to be our main mode for storing electricity. I'm sorry. Now, maybe graphene-lined batteries, which is something we can get into at a later date, that is a pretty promising technology that seems to be making its way into the market. Graphene is an incredible element. I mean, this, and we'll probably go over that, I'm sure, somewhere down the line. But graphene-lined batteries seem to be pretty promising, way better than lithium. But again, the technology is just not there. There is a sodium battery that the United States taxpayer funded a company to invent, to create. And then after this technology group created this sodium battery, I forget the exact name of it, but it was able to store electricity like 50 times longer than lithium-ion batteries, which is our best technology that we have today. And lo and behold, that technology ends up making its way to China. And now China has the technology, and this is going to piss you off, I know, because it does me, but it's totally expected. Wouldn't you know that China is now producing these batteries that the American taxpayer funded to invent, and they're selling these batteries back to us. So the Department of Energy actually completely let this patent slip through the cracks, and China was able to get a hold of it. This Chinese corporation was able to get the patent, and maybe we'll talk about this. Maybe we did already. Just in a nutshell, just to quickly summarize, the Department of Energy was working on this patent. They ended up finishing this battery, this sodium-type battery that was incredibly efficient. And then somehow, some way, a Chinese corporation, this Chinese company, energy company, ended up getting a hold of the patent. And now this Chinese company is manufacturing these batteries, even though the Department of Energy sent a cease and desist order, essentially telling the Chinese company that, yo, like, we want this patent back. You're not allowed to manufacture this. But they pretty much just gave the U.S. the middle finger, and they're like, look, this is our technology. We got it. And even if they did give the patent back and they were forced to give it back, all they have to do is just have their scientists go out and create it and get their own patent on it. And so this is the problem with a big bureaucratic government, and one of the many problems among pushing all this green energy crap onto the people. But I just feel like I am a firm believer that the more the government is involved in private life and private corporations in society, the worse things are. The government needs to have a very specific role. That is it. And I am a firm believer also that I think Congress should be in session like once every 3 years. Like, I don't think there should be Congress in session all day, every single day for 200 days a year. I just think it's unnecessary. I think it's a huge waste of money. I think every time Congress is in session, the American people lose more of their freedom and more of their money. And so I'm one of those conservatives that obviously, like all conservatives, believe in small government. But we're not getting that now. We're getting bigger government. And the bigger this government gets, the more tyrannical they become. Because that's almost the exact definition of tyranny, is it not? A group of authorities that essentially have power and control over the people. Well, that's the government. It just goes to show that the unintended consequences of the left's ideas and this electric vehicle crash just kind of opened my eyes to this whole thing. So believe it or not, this whole segment was all based on this one video that I seen of this EV crash. And I'm just afraid we're going to start seeing more and more of this. And so I want to prepare my listeners. So when you start seeing, flaming cars on the side of the road that won't go out and are sitting there for 2 or 3 days, it's because it's an electric vehicle and the first responders can't put the vehicle out and can't take it away because of the reignition of the batteries. So this is a problem. I think it's going to cause major issues with the roads. I think it's going to cost the taxpayer hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on retrofitting old parking garages to update them to hold more weight of these electric vehicles. A whole laundry list of issues I see from just this tiny, tiny piece of the green energy, this climate religion agenda that they're pushing down everybody's throats. And I just think we need to go the opposite direction of this, and we need to not force electric vehicles. I certainly don't think government should be adopting multi-billion-dollar programs into electric vehicles. That's pretty much the gist of the whole show. So, listen, stay vigilant out there. We have a lot to get into. I'm going to be talking to you guys here in a second. I wanted to talk about some election stuff going on in Donald Trump's primary votes, and I wanted to talk about where Donald Trump is in this in his polls, even though we're not big fans of polls. I think that you can get a pretty good idea of the momentum and which side the momentum is on. And I have to say, if you're Donald Trump's campaign, you're feeling pretty good right now. But so that's why I wanted to talk on the next segment about what's going on in the campaign, what's going on in his court cases, and what exactly is tyranny. I want to talk about what tyranny is on the next segment. You know, if Democrats and the people and the Biden voters and people on the left are going to be constantly yelling out the phrase threat to democracy, and Donald Trump's going to be a dictator, Donald Trump's going to be a tyrant, I think it's a good idea that my listeners, we know and understand what exactly is tyranny. And so that's what I want to talk about in the next segment. Well, we got a lot of stuff to get into, and I want to dig deep into why I feel like we're already in a tyranny right now. And I think the evidence is overwhelming. So that's what we're going to be talking about on the next show. As always, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you share the show with your friends and family. And if you want to support the show, please download this podcast on any major podcast platform. If you want to follow the show on Rumble, the last bastion for free speech, download the show, follow the show, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And if you want to get a hold of me directly, you can get a hold of me at StephenTorielloShow@gmail.com. And as always, I want you guys to have a good weekend. I'll talk to you guys here in a little bit. God bless you, and God bless America. You guys have a good one. Bye-bye.